Welcome to Writing for Psychology featuring Jane Halonen along with me, Garth Neufeld. This 7-part Psych Session series features conversations around topics related to writing in psychology, from finding opportunities to finding inspiration and so much more. Quite simply, this was my personal attempt to learn something from one of the masters in our field and to share it with you, our audience. We hope you enjoy it. Well, we're back. Jane, welcome back to, I guess this will be episode 3, and we're going to talk about writing.
Good. And thank you.
Okay, so we want to kind of just chug along here. The goal of this, if anybody is listening to this as like an isolated episode, the goal for this would just be for us to learn. I approached Jane to talk a little bit about how maybe her tips and tricks for writing, or what she's learned over a career of writing for psychology. And so check out those first 2 episodes if you want to get the background of that. We talked about making and getting opportunities, and today we're going to talk about inspiration and creativity. And maybe before I hear the sage on this, maybe I will just tell you what my experience is for. I think that most of what I do that's any fun related to career, or maybe even outside a career, is motivated internally for me. And a lot of the really fun things are something that occurs to me that kind of surprises me, a question I have. Maybe it's even beyond what I think I'm comfortable doing, or what I have the skill set to do. But it is this inner, it's this compelling thing. That's where creativity really comes from for me. I'm pointing right now. You can't see me, but I'm pointing kind of to my chest and my heart area, because I feel like that's where it comes from for me. I realize that's kind of weird when it comes to academics, but you're shaking your head no.
I'm shaking my head no, because the only thing I would disagree with is where I would point to.
Right.
I tend to think of that process that you're describing, certainly intrinsic, but I almost feel like it's something that descends on me. So for me, it's something that comes from above, and it's very cognitive. It's not so much heart-oriented, but very much agree that there is a feeling of being visited. Yeah.
It's interesting. I've heard this outside of psychology in many creative fields, even in spiritual fields, that it is this being visited. And it's escaping me where I first heard this now, but I think this is probably the idea for a long, long time, that inspiration visits us from time to time.
I think it goes along with that notion that you might have a muse. There's some force out there that enables you to get in touch with your best, most creative self. And in a way, that's a little bit sad, because it's almost suggesting that we ourselves can't own being creative without feeling like it comes from elsewhere.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, right. If somebody really subscribes to that, it might put them at risk for a little bit of an external locus of control, where they think it's not me, it's this other thing. And that's where we get all of these artists and creators who need to find their depressive place in order to create, or something like that. But I don't think it's quite like that for academics. But I really do hear what you say, and what you're saying. I agree with it. And I actually think it's fantastic. To be able to listen to that voice. And I'm so glad that the conversation is going here, because these are the things that I don't think people talk about much, because there's some scientists, some psychologists out there, some friend of ours who's saying, oh, come on, we know it's not a visitor. We know, we may not know exactly what it is, but that's not the scientific experience that's going on here. But I can't shake the feeling.
Well, we know it's not a visitor too. It still feels like a visitor.
Right.
And in fact, I think a habit I've had over time is that when people call me and ask me to do some sort of keynote address or some theme talk or something, they usually immediately say, "What's your title?" It's like, okay, give me a second. And I'll lean back in my chair and just kind of wait, and the title materializes. And so there's just something that has a kind of mystical feeling about that. And I've actually joked about that in some presentations where I said, the Muse was busy reading Harry Potter and didn't visit me for a while. But when she arrived, and it feels like a she, when she arrived, boy, she had a great idea. And so I'm able to exploit that. I know it's all me, but it still feels like an external force.
Yeah. I'm reminded that there are like ancient wisdom traditions where she's always a she. So it doesn't surprise me that it's a she for you and for me as well. But yeah. So that's interesting. Leaning back in your chair and taking a moment and letting the title formulate. I think I resonate. Maybe this is the same. Sometimes I get onto a thought. I'm working on something. I get into a line of thinking, or maybe I'm out for a run or something like that. And all of a sudden I get this flood of ideas that, again, don't feel like mine. They feel like they come from elsewhere. At those moments, the feeling is that this is now, it doesn't always turn out that way. Oftentimes you go through the creative process and you choose 1 out of 10, but it often feels like this is right. There is some more depth. There is some more truth here. And maybe what we're talking about is this resonates with me, and or, whoa, this feels like it might resonate with other people as well.
Yeah, that moment where it all coheres, that there's that sense of if I've got 10 ideas on the plate, there's one that's going to stand out for reasons that it matches where you are intellectually and emotionally, and you also think there'll be some insider information for the audience if you go in that direction. I have to admit, though, that there have been times when the Muse descends and gives me an idea and I go with it, and then I think, I'm not so sure I like this one. And I can't, for some reason, I can't give it up once I've made the commitment. And usually when I have that second voice checking in to say, oh, maybe not, the second voice is usually right, that there's something not quite right about what you chose the first time.
Oh, so that's really interesting.
Those visitors, they're an interesting lot.
So when you are in that situation, is it coming to you last minute? Is it coming to you a couple weeks out? And I realize that it's probably not that clear cut, but I think the question I'm asking for is, at what point do you abandon something that you thought was good and creative? Because we've all written a lesson or a talk or an article where we get halfway through it and we think, oh no, this is not what I thought it was, or I got lost on the way.
Yeah, I wish I could say that it happens. Good judgment kicks in, and it happens a lot. But, once I make a commitment, sunk cost being what it is, I will usually try to see it through to the end. And so what that means when those, fortunately, this is rare, on those rare occasions when it's a misfire, I just kick myself a little after. But I usually learn something from that about either my process or whatever's going on. And so it doesn't feel like a complete loss. I don't feel terrible that it didn't work out exactly the way I wanted it to. There's usually something salvageable.
Right. Well, I want to get to nuts and bolts in a minute, but I'm having too much fun with this right now. So what happens when you are reading something that is resonating with you in a similar way? And I'm, of course, talking about my experience, but maybe before I share mine, do you have the experience of when you read something that sometimes it just jumps out, and I'm talking professionally, academically, jumps out, grabs you by the collar, or some experience like that where which I think is related. Maybe it's the other side of it's somebody else's creative process or what they have to say, but what's coming up for you when I say that?
I think what the place I would go with that kind of lead is that I have this unabashed admiration for people who can put words together in a unique and elegant way. And so when I'm doing pleasure reading, I do read novels. And when an author is able to put together a thought in a way that is just distinctive and wonderful, it actually takes me out of the writing because I'm admiring the writing, the structure of the writing so much. I think when I see great writing, and we talked about this a little bit the last time, there's not a whole lot of that in psychology. When I see great writing, I have just a touch of envy. And then I think, I wonder a little bit about how that person ended up being able to craft words in such an artful manner. But I think in general, I aspire to be that kind of person where when I say something, that it will have an impact where people will say, "Ooh, that was well spoken," or "that was well said." And I get enough feedback from folks to have that goal confirmed a little bit.
What I'm thinking about now is that there are some wonderful ideas out there, I'm sure, that just aren't articulated in the way that you've just described. And, maybe for me, what happens is when I'm reading something that's written very well, the idea can come through and get me in a different way.
It galvanizes you. I love that word. It just simply gets right next to who you are and is inspirational, I think.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And you know what, when it happens, I will not power through a book anymore. If a book, and the ideas could be great, but I just don't have the time. In fact, no, it's not even about time. I have too many fun things going on in my life that I can't read a book that doesn't do that job of galvanizing me, unless I commit to it, which you talked about. So maybe we need to talk about that a little bit. But yeah. So do you read things that are unappealing to you?
I do.
You do? Uh-huh.
I do. Not a lot, but I'll try out new authors, and I am one of those people that once I start a book, I feel like I want to go through all the way to the end because I know how hard it is to get a book written. And I wish I could abandon it, but I don't tend to. Instead, I'll read it and go, "Oh, well, I'm not going to read anything else that this person writes again." So I think that commitment is a challenge. Also, I enjoy fiction that has sequence to it. Right now, I just started the 7th book of the Outlander series, which a lot of folks out there will resonate with. And the writing in that book is so vivid. The author is spectacular. And so I love being able to discover authors like that can transport me and do so reliably.
Yeah. Do you think that good academic writing, that folks are reading pretty widely, if they're good academic writers?
I think if they're good academic writers, here's my response to that is when I open up an issue of TOP or STLP, and I'm doing reading in the area in which I publish, I genuinely get excited when I see certain names. And maybe not so much when I see other names. I simply know that there are some people who write really well despite all the conventions that push us toward mediocre writing.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. Okay, let's talk about creativity in writing. We've kind of been out there a little bit. Let's maybe dial it back to nuts and bolts or whatever, however you want to take this. But the topic again today is finding inspiration and creativity. I'm not trying to discount what we've talked about so far, but I think people want to know exactly how does that work for you? And I think you've done a little bit of thinking about this. So do you want to just start in?
Sure. It depends a little bit what the mode is that I'm creating in. If I'm doing speeches, for example, the normal mode is get the title, wrestle the muse to the ground, get the title, and then I'm able to sit with PowerPoint and throw ideas into a PowerPoint. And I never create actual text for presentations. I operate just on PowerPoint and the bullets of PowerPoint. And then I talk to it and I rehearse it. I rehearse it relentlessly. In fact, you asked earlier, do I do things at the last minute? Never. I'm not that kind of person. I don't want to be that kind of person. I think that would produce way too much anxiety. So I will talk out a presentation multiply. I've often said I rehearse presentations in my car. And now with people talking on cell phones in the car, that doesn't look so odd. But way back when I started doing that, that was a little bit odd that I would be talking to myself in the imaginary audience in the back seat and realize that my window was down and there were people staring at me. Like, what the hell is wrong with you? But that procedure, that incubation time, that practice time, then ultimately allows me at the point of doing those kinds of presentations to be very conversational and spontaneous, because I can't look at a text and read to people. By the way, that's one of the things I have the most difficulty with in creative writing is when people spend so much time pulling together a scholarly piece and then they read it to me. Please recognize I don't like to be read to, especially when they're complex ideas. I need you to talk with me so that the passion in what you're trying to address comes out. So that's a very distinctive process. Yeah. Okay.
So I have some questions. Anyway, it was really nice to hear that. I think people are going to find that really valuable. So I have some clarifying questions. You get a title and then you start building slides, and those slides become ideas, and they may or may not make it into the final talk. They may get moved around, but you are leaning on your knowledge. Essentially, this is the interesting thing about what you're saying, is that if a new faculty member who has not been in the field for very long, they do know something about some things for certain. They could do this but as you, I think, get more, as you write more, as you see more, as you go along in your career, what you can talk about or bring into that presentation is much more broad. In fact, what you're telling me is that you're not on the databases or in a database looking for studies. You're talking about what you've internalized already, what you know from writing and reading. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's true for presentations. I don't think it's true for book chapters or scholarly articles.
Right.
But yeah, for presentations, I'm usually talking out of the mass of knowledge that I've acquired. And I think it corresponds with one of the areas that I like to study, which is the transition from novice to expert. That, yes, in the beginning, your database, what you can conveniently access is not very big. But I've been writing now for 40 years, and I do pay attention to new scholarship that comes out. But I also know that there are some go-to articles that always inform what it is that I'm writing about. Just as one example, I think this is an article that was in Teaching of Psychology back in 1986, was an article written by Stanford Erickson in which he talked about the impermanence of memorized learning. And I read it in 1986, and it was such a good article. He came up with this metaphor of the sunburn instruction, a sunburn theory of instruction, where you expose students to the light of the field, and it produces the same effects as sunburn, that it's temporary and it's painful. And that has always struck me as something that I will rely on that that metaphor a lot in my writing, whether I'm directly citing it, which I just recently did in the last piece of writing I did, or if it's just part of the way I think about the literature. So I, at least in presentations, I don't necessarily do literature searches. I've usually been asked to do a presentation because I'm regarded as somewhat of an expert in the field. I'm good with that. But the writing for text is a little bit different.
Yeah. Okay. Why this is really resonating with me is because I teach at a community college. I don't have a research heavy background. Teaching is the thing that I do. And I remember getting early invitations for talks, for giving talks, and not really knowing that I couldn't just read off a script. And in fact, a lot of my national colleagues would do a better job at talking about Sodal, for example, than I would, because that's their world. And so I needed to bring something else to it, something very authentic. And what I learned in that process is that we are all experts on something. You have to figure out what it is that you can speak to authentically and in an expert way. And whether you have 40 years of teaching experience or 10 years of teaching experience, there is something that you've learned and something that's authentic to you that will come across in a talk like that. What I'm learning from you is that this creative process for you is from like slide to slide is a creative process. So yes. Let me just ask you, like, I've seen your presentations. I laugh at your slides a lot. I think that they're engaging, and then and your style is very conversational. It's neat to pull back the curtain now and hear why that is, because I didn't know that. But how do you start? Do you find the image first? Do you find a couple words first? How does it work?
How it works for presentations is I do the equivalent of free writing. So I basically put a concept on the slide, and I say about what I want to say about that concept on the slide. I move on to the next. I think about the way they're sequenced. Usually the visual supports that I provide are after the fact. And that for me is one of the more engaging things that I do, because I think the internet is just so incredibly rich, either in quotations or cartoons or whatever. I've learned that for my style of speaking, I can do about one slide a minute to be able to manage the pace that is most useful or has the greatest impact. And I try particularly, and I think this is increasingly showing up in my teaching as well. Increasingly, I use graphics to engage. My lectures now look almost like graphic novels in some ways. And so I think I try to bring that as a way to capture audience attention. On purpose, I try to mix a good quotation with a wonderful cartoon, with an old picture that's relevant, that I'm try to make sure that I mix up the kinds of visual support. But that is usually the 11th hour. And even though I don't do working under the gun, I do continuously revise what it is I'm about to present, probably until the hour before. There's a point at which it just gels. There's a point at which it's like, okay, you can't shine this up and make it any prettier than it is. It's ready to go. If that happens early, I'll still fuss with it. But I will sometimes prepare for a presentation for 6 months. I don't know.
Right. Okay. So you don't start with images first. You start with concepts or words or ideas or something like that. Okay. My last question about this is, when you are talking to those slides, are you writing down any of that stuff or recording it so you remember it? Or is it just what occurs to me this time, and that might be different from what occurs to me next time as I'm learning?
That is such a good question, because I've had a struggle with that, especially when I'm talking to the slides in my head in the car. So I'm talking, I'm driving, I go, oh, this would be a good idea. And I'm driving. I really shouldn't even be doing that, according to my colleague, Steve Cass, because that's a distraction and I'm more vulnerable to accidents. But I have been known to pull off the side of the road and write something down. I don't write and drive. Steve Cass, I never write and drive. I'm just telling you. But I think there are times when it's not terribly convenient that I get that other creative impulse about one more study that I want to include, or a joke that I can tell, or whatever it is I want to include. But that process is why it takes so long to produce a good talk.
So you are keeping record of the content that you're going to include in each of those slides.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. It's not systematic. I wish, it's because I never know when that's going to strike me. In fact, you mentioned the point that you might get a rush of ideas when you're out jogging or running. And my best rush of ideas is the moment I wake up in the morning, when my brain is nice and fresh.
Yeah.
I can be flooded with interesting new directions.
Yeah, there are definitely folks out there outside of our field who do more creative things. I'm thinking like comics and writers that I've heard. These two different strategies. One being when the muse strikes, you listen and write. Or setting aside that time almost daily as a discipline. So as we transition kind of out of giving talks into creativity in other kind of areas of writing, do you subscribe to? Have you tried the discipline strategy versus the kind of when it occurs to me strategy?
I have not. I think I'd probably describe my style as somewhere in between. If I know I've got a target, a deadline, a talk to give, or a chapter to submit, I do try to pace out how much writing I need to get done by a particular time to allow for the revision that I think makes good writing. But I don't say I'm going to write 500 words a day. I've never found that helpful, because I think when you hit the window, when you're in the zone is so rewarding to be in that you just stay with it. And I would find, okay, today I need to sit down and write X number of words. Much more of a challenge.
Okay. And I realize that I'm pushing us into our next conversation, which is a little bit of the organizing and composing part of things. So I'm going to rein myself back in for inspiration and creativity. Let's talk about other kinds of writing. So what do you want to talk about next? For scholarly writing or yeah.
Yeah, scholarly writing as opposed to presentations. Scholarly writing for me typically happens by invitation. And that may not be the case, especially for starting out authors. From the beginning of my career, I've been particularly fortunate. I'm careful to use the word lucky because I can feel Eric on my shoulder saying, you weren't lucky.
That's exactly how he sounds, by the way.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've been fortunate in that I've been in places where people have seen me talk or make presentations. And that tends to result in people saying, what would you think about writing X? And in those moments, I'll kind of shake my head and go, well, do I know enough about writing X to be able to do it? And if I do, and if the time frame is reasonable, I will say yes. And then set about in a slightly different process if it's in a an area where I need to do some digging and some scholarship, then that is going to be the first step to make sure that whatever impulse I think I have about what would be a good message to share with other people, what is it that's going on in the literature? How does what I'm thinking about it compare to literature? That is a much more disciplined process than what I do for presentations. And I still use the free writing strategy. I might be doing the literature review at the same time as sitting down opposite page and just throwing words on the page to see what's in my head. I want to see what's in my head. How will I know what I think until I see what I write about it, is how I think about it sometimes.
It's interesting. It's interesting. The process is still a little bit mystical, even from your when somebody asks you to do something, you're going inside and thinking, do I have something to say? And probably, am I interested in, am I resonating with this? And then, correct. Yeah. And then this free writing, you've got this like this literature review going on the side, but really you're going to surprise yourself, hopefully, with what you're putting down on the paper. And that's why you're doing the free writing. Right.
Yeah. I think just simply summarizing literature as it exists is kind of boring. So I don't tend to do that kind of massive literature review process in what I do. I also don't do bench research. I don't collect data. I'm a little bit of an anomaly in my department where people are doing very traditional kinds of research. And instead, I try to describe what I do as more theoretical, more observational. And since I've found audiences willing to read what I have to write, that seems to be well respected by my colleagues. But it does create a little bit of a problem for students who say, can I join your research team? I was like, well, no, because there's not that kind of bench research going on unless I'm doing an assessment project. And then maybe I can ask them to join that.
Okay. So scholarly writing, does it matter? Last time we talked about writing for the Chronicle versus maybe writing for a journal or something like that. Does that change any of the creative or the inspirational process where that starts from?
I don't think it changed where it starts from, but it certainly modifies the pace and the rigor. If I'm writing for the Chronicle, then happily that means I'm writing with someone, with my writing partner, Dana Dunn. And that process usually takes about 48 hours, which contrasts with scholarly writing that one does, which can take a hell of a long time, or at the very least, it's going to take a couple months to be able to produce a good article. Again, with the process of what do I think about it, what's going on in the literature, how do those things cohere, get it on paper, revise it again. I tell my students I'm a 7-draft writer, that what I'm trying to do is help them not turn in a first draft. So your first draft is your brain dump. Nobody wants to see your brain dump. What they want to see is polished expression that will make people smile when they read it. That reminds me of our wonderful friend Charles Brewer, who used to say the whole point of writing is felicity of expression. I should smile when I read what you write. And I don't think I can produce that effect until I've polished it up nicely, and that takes me about 7 drafts.
Wow. Yeah. I'm okay. Anyway, I was going to go somewhere else, and now I'm going to stop myself. But without getting into the actual process of organizing thoughts, composing, what else do we need to talk about when it comes to creativity? And like production of ideas. And I think we've hit a lot here. I do hear you say that there are times when you're asked to write something on a topic or give a presentation on a topic or something like that. And at that point, you can still engage in a creative process. There are also times where you get to write whatever you want. And that's fun because I think the creative process may actually be the catalyst for doing that writing with Dana, for example, or something like that. What else have we missed from the creative inspirational point?
I don't think we've missed anything in particular, but I would say that there are things you can do that can spark your creativity. One of the things I love to do just for fun is to take a concept that I'm working on and Google quotes about the concept. Because even just reading the array of things that people write, I always tend to find myself pulling back to Mark Twain or Dorothy Parker. There are some people who have that knack for saying things that are just right, that can further my own process, even if I don't use the quote. And so that's a kind of an extra tip. When you're stuck, go find out something pithy that people have said, and that may be able to unlock another logical stream in you to be able to rescue where you are.
All right. Well, that brings up a question for me, which is, what if I am trying to create out of where it's the well is not within me? What if I am trying to say something that maybe I don't have any business talking about? Because I could see people starting with quotes. What have other people said in this, and really relying, and maybe this is the thing, instead of relying on a creative internal process, you can pull together a talk by pulling, and I'm guessing there's really skilled people who can do this, pull from, you've talked about, even you pull quotations, you pull images, you do all that. How is that different from what can occur internally and creatively?
How is it different? I think I tend to treat supporting material as spice, not as the main course. And one of the things I try to tell my students, I recognize something that I'm thinking about writing now is looking at the developmental stages of how students become better writers. Because I'm really struck with how at some point, as students make the progress from being very novice to being less novice, we can't say expert yet, that they believe the process of writing a paper is go out and get passages that they can insert, quote, 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 because they can show you that they can pull the right ideas from the literature. When in fact, that's not what we're asking them to do. What we're asking them to do is interpret literature. Write in your own words. Even if you're getting the ideas from elsewhere, your job as a writer is to put it in your voice. So any of those side things that I do, it's like salt and pepper and nutmeg.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's really, really important to me as well. When I'm teaching students, is for them to find their voice. Of course, I'm just introducing that to them generally. And for so many of us, I think even into our mid-careers, and maybe even further than that, as you've said, maybe a lot of people haven't found that authentic voice yet within themselves. I think that maybe this is where, and I'm out of my element talking about this, but I'm just going to guess that in psychology, we've talked about kind of the way that we are prescribed to write, or there is a general way that people are going to approach writing, and that is not super conducive to finding your authentic voice. So,
no, it's not. The experimental report format is deadly.
Right. So multiple skills, different skills. Well, thanks for talking about creativity. I found it enjoyable. And
I did too. Thank you for asking.
Good. Well, let's shut this one down, and the next episode we will discuss something a little more nuts and bolts. It sounds like.
All right.